I'm just going to turn it over to you, Hank, and for any introductions and anything else you need to give us before we jump in.
Thank you. I appreciate the opportunity to talk here again. I think that if you want to have the complete background for this follow-on Q&A, it would be good to watch the video from the Lunch and Learn. I'm not going to cover down on everything I talked in that now, but brief background is grew up in doing outdoors activities, went to the Naval Academy, became a Marine officer, and through the Marine Corps had lots of different security type responsibilities, as well as ended up doing some finance, and finally ended up in cyberspace operations, which included offense and defense. And then through that last assignment, I started studying more broadly what risks were to our dependencies on the internet and everything that is connected via the internet. And I realized those were fairly broad, and we should be doing things collectively to mitigate those risks. I do want to mention at the beginning of this, and I think I have a disclaimer in the video also, but any views here that I express are my own. They don't reflect anything from the U.S. government or from any of the companies I work for or have previously worked for. It's just based on my own research and my own opinions.
You know, if you were running a business and this thing was on its way over, you know, let's say 45 days from now, we're on the tail end, we're starting to see some economic activity pick back up, you're a business owner, like, man, I made it through this. What do you do? What's the one, maybe one or two things you first engage in?
So if I were running any organization, of course, to include a business, right now I would be planning my recovery. I might not know what the date is. In military operations, like the reason they called the D-Day invasion D-Day was because the day of the invasion was not known until they designated it, and then it became D-10, D-9, D-8 until they got the D-Day. And so at some point in the taper of this, if you have a plan, a program of action and milestones that lays out your intentions for recovering the business, then you can enact that rather than starting to plan when you think the recovery has begun. And of course, any plan you have to shift off of it, but it's better to have that plan in place, and everybody on your team can be preparing with you. And part of that plan would be to conduct what, again, in the military we call a hot wash. Comes from when the vehicles are still hot after an exercise or operation, you're washing them down for the first time, but everybody's mind is still in the middle of the operation. And so I would have part of that planning in your recovery to do a hot wash or a quick after action and start capturing the lessons learned and what you want to do differently to mitigate, I would not say the risk of a pandemic, but I would say a disruption to our society, to yourself and your business and your customers and your employees. Because as I mentioned earlier, the causality to those disruptions is wide and varied, but the net results can be very similar in nature. Yeah.
What are the key elements typically of a hot wash or an after action review on the military side? I assume you can discuss this. I don't actually know, but are there?
Oh yeah.
Are there 3 things, 5 things? Like what would that typically look like?
Right. So an overarching key element is check your ego at the door. Okay. So if in the middle of this, you, Paul, as the owner of your company, you realize that you made some mistake, then come in and talk about the mistake that you made. And that should go for everybody. So if it's somebody who, is junior in the organization, they should know that there's not going to be retribution for their identifying that. That creates an environment where people are most likely to be transparent and share what they really learned. Yeah. If they think they're being evaluated on what they're sharing, they might be less likely to.
Yeah. Which goes to I think which goes to, as leader, I think you may have said that you should be the first one to be vulnerable, because then everybody else will feel comfortable being vulnerable too.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I would say, well, here's what I learned. And I mean, there could be positive lessons too. As a leader, I wouldn't say, well, it's my lesson learned that this organization was clearly led through the crisis. But for you to say, here's some things that I would do differently. It should be a blame game on anybody's part. It should be, here's the observation and here's here's what we do differently. What the framework that I would use, and there's lots of variations of this, but would be people come in and it can be very informally written, but a topic, a description of whatever the observation was, and then a recommendation to come from that. And on all of those, I would recommend they be brief. The solutioning can occur later, but for now, it's just the identification of what's close to home.